Why are so many people leaving the UK? In my opinion, and simply from speaking to people that have already done so, leaving the UK is no longer an act of restlessness or rejection of the UK itself, but considered a very constructive decision about the future that they want to build for themselves. In a world where mobility is increasingly normal and careers, families, and identities are tied to one place, choosing to leave can be a positive step rather than a loss. Also, when you frame it properly, immigration isn't about turning away from the UK, but about recognizing when another country may offer better terms and conditions with one's ambitions, values, and quality of life, and most importantly, bringing up a family. One of the most excuse me, one of the most compelling reasons that people are leaving the UK at the moment, anyway, is the growing imbalance between effort and reward. This is especially true when you look at the overall income tax rates in the UK, along with the recent doubling down by the Chancellor by a freezing yet again of the tax thresholds, which drags literally millions of people into higher tax bands. For a large proportion of professionals, including myself, wages have struggled to keep pace with the general cost of living, housing, childcare, transport, energy, etc. This has created a sense of financial stagnation, even for those that are working hard and progressing in their careers. And in light of the recent budget, it does seem to be that there's little reward for work overall. In contrast, many countries offer a much clearer link between the productivity and prosperity, and where disposable income stretches much further. And long-term planning, financial planning that is, feels achievable rather than just aspirational. It's why I get really angry when I hear the Westminster kind of political stooges saying that UK is looking to be an aspirational country. I thought we already were. Leaving the UK in this context becomes more of a rational economic decision rather than an emotional one. But of course, emotion plays into this then as well. Work culture also plays a very significant role. While the UK prides itself on professionalism and resilience, it often normalizes very long hours for people. Um, I've personally been affected by this quite a long time ago, but it does impact you in ways that you never thought possible. Um, Other countries have taken a far more deliberate approach to protecting personal time, encouraging flexible working, for example, and valuing output over visibility. There's been a big drive here in the UK for people returning back to an office, more and more, where people would have been originally hired as a fully remote worker, and then some new CEO comes in and suddenly decides, well, I want everybody back in the office 5 days a week. So that's about visibility rather than productivity, in my opinion. And again, the other people would view that as a controlling aspect then as well. Um, I mean, other countries have taken a far more deliberate approach to flexible working. This is especially true in France, where they've taken steps, for example, and made it a legal requirement for employers not to contact employees out of hours. In France, the standard working week is 35 hours a week. The standard working hours here, or the average working hours here, is 42. Yeah. In France, if you work more than 35 hours a week, you have to agree to that with your employer, and the employer has to pay you accordingly. Try doing that here in the UK, and you'd probably be fired. Quality of life outside of work as well is another very powerful factor when you think about everything, and it's one that's been massively overlooked by many. That is until something very significant happens in your life. The UK's climate. We all know that summer lasts about 3 minutes in the UK. Density, the infrastructure pressures, it can make everyday life feel very constrained, especially in major cities where it's not uncommon for people to be spending over 50% of their income on rent alone. Um, it certainly made me laugh recently when the government, with a straight face, were celebrating the freezing of rail fares, failing, of course, to mention that the UK already has some of the highest train fares in the world. captive audience, I suppose. But people are starting to realize that there has to be more to life. In many parts of the world, people enjoy a far more space, greater access to nature in general. In many parts of the world, these elements aren't viewed as luxuries, but they're viewed as a necessity for people to have. Um, Here in the UK, a lot of the time, people, escaping to the countryside is viewed as a luxury. And then when you do escape to the countryside, it costs a bloody fortune to do everything. Leaving the UK as well can also open the door to a general life rhythm that just feels calmer, healthier, and more intentional, if you want to call it that. A new start is a new beginning, so to say. There's also a cultural dimension to leaving that is often misunderstood by many. Living abroad exposes people to different ways of thinking about success, community, family, their own identity. It can also be really enriching, generally speaking, to experience different societies or simply a different way of doing things. Mickey Flanagan once described as people from the UK, that started going to Spain in the 70s, as we turned up in the 1970s. We conquered the Spanish. We like it here, but we're struggling to get a roast on Sunday. It does make me laugh when you see people going abroad and the first thing that they do is head straight to the Irish bar or the Brit bar or whatever, forgetting about all of the other bars that are there as well. And of course, that's down to what you feel comfortable with. But I make a conscious effort whenever I go abroad to try something local. Even if it's just going into a local cafe, a local restaurant, bistro, whatever it's going to be, or a local pub, where I would be the minority type thing. The other thing to take into consideration is that for families, the decision to leave the UK is very often driven by long-term considerations rather than the immediate dissatisfaction with the UK. I don't think anybody with hand on heart can say over the last 10, 15 years here in the UK that their lives have been improved by any significant factor whatsoever. We had 14 years of a Conservative government, which basically banjacks the entire system. Now, the usual excuses they'll say will be, well, COVID came along and we had to bail a load of people out and businesses out. Well, every other country had to do that as well. And every other country isn't struggling the way that the UK is struggling. In 2024, Labour were elected after a very long hiatus in opposition. It was a very hollow victory, though. If you think about it, is essentially they received less than 34% of the vote and have proceeded in less than 18 months to alienate almost the entire country to the point where everybody's thinking, what the hell is going on here? If you could write a book on how not to do things politically wise, the UK would probably be a shining example of how not to do it in a democracy. But there you go. What can you do? Building a career network or citizenship of another country as well. It can also provide resilience and options for people. Reducing dependence on a single system, if you want to call it that. This mindset, it kind of reflects that strategic thinking that people would have rather than kind of any kind of disloyalty to the UK, because simply put, there's a lot of people in the UK at the moment simply can't afford to stay here. How is it right, for example, that somebody can work 40 hours or 42 hours a week and still need to claim benefits at the end of working 42 hours a week? That says more about us as a society that allows that to happen than anything else. And it's, we're supposedly a G7 country. G7 meaning one of, a member of the G7 club means that you are one of the richest countries in the world, but yet we still allow this to happen. The recent budget as well, of course, has alienated an entire group of people that are just, feckless, that are layabouts. And there's that division that's right down the middle of the country now, where realistically speaking, in a lot of cases, there's no incentive to work whatsoever. Why would you? If you've got 6 kids at the moment, you've just been and you haven't worked, you've just been given a £14,500 benefits increase because of the list on that. Now, call me old fashioned, but you know, maybe people need to think about that. But there you go. Importantly as well, and this is probably one of the most important things. I mean, leaving the UK doesn't erase your identity or your connection with the UK. I'm Irish. I've lived in the UK for nearly 30 years, 25 of which have been full time, and kind of 5 years kind of coming back and forward doing contract work. But I still identify as Irish, even though I live in the UK. And I'll always identify as Irish. Probably one, because of my accent, but two, that's Ireland is where I was born. That's where I was brought up. That's where I lived for the first 18 years of my life, and I'll always identify as Irish, no matter what happens. Um, so it doesn't erase your identity in any way by leaving the UK to go to another country, and it's the same, I suspect, right across the world. You've got people moving to Australia. Even if they become Australian citizens, for example, they'll still going to identify as being originally from the UK, and rightly so. Same as I've got lots of friends that live in Australia. I've got family that live in Australia. They're Australian citizens, but they identify as Irish. So all this nonsense that you hear about, people abandoning the UK, they're not abandoning the UK. They're not abandoning. They're leaving the UK, but they're not abandoning their identity in any way. Ultimately, leaving the UK is a good thing when it's driven by clarity as well, rather than frustration, um, and by the intention rather than the impulse. Like, this has kind of been growing quite a bit over the last few years. I mean, the CSO released the figures for how many people have left the UK permanently so far in 2025, and it's frightening. Over 80,000 people, that's people that have been born in the UK, reared in the UK, for example, have left. Now, those figures, by the way, don't take into account the family members that go with them. It's the person that originally would have applied to leave. It basically means there's 80,000. I suspect it's probably a lot more than that, actually. It's probably at least double that. Because when you take into consideration that when somebody applies to leave, they're probably going to take their wife, their kids, with them as well, and of course they're selling up everything over here, and they leave the country. So I suspect, as I said, that figure is quite a bit more than that. Finally, the decision to leave should never be taken lightly. You either go or you stay. There shouldn't be an in between. Permanently leaving the UK is a huge step. It's a massive step for many people because, as I said, you're leaving what you know. You're starting all over again as well financially when you think about it, because anybody that knows that moves to another country. I mean, when I moved to the UK first, getting something as simple as a bank account was a real uphill struggle when I moved here first, because I wasn't born here. I had all the relevant ID and documentation, but because I didn't have any financial history here in any way, shape, or form, getting even the simplest of bank accounts was a big deal. Now, I know there's a lot of agencies out there can organize this type of stuff for you, when you move to a new country, but all of that costs money. So, as I said, making that decision to leave a country to move to a completely new country and a completely new way of doing things, driving on the wrong side of the road, for example, stuff that you and I take for granted here living in the UK, things like driving licenses. Where am I going to live? How much is property going to cost? What's my utility bills going to be like? Am I going to be employed gainfully? What are the wages going to be like? And if the wages are more, what's the cost of living like? So before anybody makes that decision to leave, they would have done all of their own research. They possibly would have visited that country that they're going to, and they would have done that. So, as I said, leaving the UK should never be taken lightly. But I suspect we're going to see those figures increasing massively over the next few years, because this country, of the government of this country has made it so difficult for people just to get by day to day that it's becoming inevitable that people are going to leave. And it's already happening. Even here in my local area, I've got friends that have literally sold everything and they've moved. Some of them have moved into the more traditional places like Spain, Portugal, France, things like that. But the thing is that they've left permanently. They're not coming back. Yeah. Now, some of them are retired. Some of them are not retired. Some of them were working for companies that gave them the option of working in Europe, and they've just decided, well, I'll just work as a contractor, and I'll move to Portugal or I'll move to Spain or whatever. But even for a UK citizen moving into Europe at the moment, it's no longer that easy either, because of Brexit and because of the free movement of people not being able to be done anymore. Even somebody that has a UK passport moving into Europe now, they have to go through the same thing that anybody else would from arriving anywhere else in the world. Now, admittedly, it may be a little bit easier and a little bit cheaper to do that for a UK citizen, but they still have to go through all of that, and all of that costs money, and there's the worry about it. And then when you arrive in that country, you have to register with the local tax authorities and the local councils, and worrying about property. And then obviously there's the language barrier in some cases as well. Again, not too much of an issue, because when it becomes a necessity, you tend to learn the language pretty quickly. I have a relative that moved to Italy quite a few years ago, and hadn't got a word of Italian, but within 3 months was conversational Italian, because she literally had to. And it's the same with friends that have moved to France. Yes, you can go out there with a smattering of French type thing, say merci, thank you type thing. But within a few months, you're going to have to start, thinking about how you're going to get on once you get outside your little bubble type thing to get on. But, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, give us a like, whatever, thumbs up, and we'll speak to you all again soon. Have fun. Bye-bye.